Today we're going to talk a little bit about absolutism and the Enlightenment. So absolutism is talking about absolute monarchs, and the Enlightenment is the process in which thinkers started to emerge post-Renaissance during the age of absolutism that started to kind of question the power of those monarchs and start rebellions. So when we're looking at absolute monarchs, the main absolute monarchs started in Spain. So, first of all, an absolute monarch is a monarch or a ruler whose power is not limited by having to consult with nobles, common people, or even representatives. They believed that they had a divine right, meaning that they received their power directly from God, and therefore they couldn't be challenged. We previously talked about how the king of the Holy Roman Empire had received his power from the Pope, and therefore was called the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Protestant Reformation started to threaten that influence. When Charles gave up his throne, he divided the empire between his brother and his son, but Philip, his son, experienced troubles uniting his land due to the differences between Catholics and Protestants. Some of his territories were Protestant and some of them were Catholic, so the Protestant Reformation really started some troubles for these monarchs. In France, they were also having issues. The Huguenots, or the French Protestants, became one of the predominant religions in France, and most of the nobles were Huguenots, but the French monarch was Catholic. The Queen of France ordered the assassination of all of the Protestants, the Huguenots, in Paris in 1592. There was a large group of them coming together for a wedding in Paris that day, and so she was able to slaughter the vast majority of them, known as the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. The newly crowned king, or after the queen, gave more rights to the Protestants, because he issued the Edict of Nantes, which gave religious freedom to the Huguenots. This was a pretty important break because previously religious freedom was not a part of governments because it questioned the power of the monarch. When King Henry IV was tragically murdered, King Louis VIII became king and was advised by a prominent Catholic cardinal named Cardinal Richelieu. And Cardinal Richelieu was not having this Huguenot crap. So his first goal was to reduce the power of the Huguenots and try to make sure that they were not going to question the power of the king anymore. When King Louis VIII died, his son King Louis IX became king, leading to France through prosperity through absolute power. He also became known as the Sun King because he just kind of believed that the whole world revolved around him. Louis IX demanded that he be in charge of everything. He was really asserting his absolute power, and he deprived most of the nobles of their influence and moved everything to his chateau in Versailles. He revoked the Edict of Nantes because he wanted all the power to be with the king. King Louis IX lived a very, very extravagant lifestyle. He depended upon the taxes from the French citizens to uphold this lifestyle and pay for the military to continually expand the French Empire. This became extremely expensive, but more about that later. The War of Spanish Succession was fought in order for King Louis IX to claim the Spanish crown and take over the Spanish Empire. But all the other European monarchs didn't want the France to have that much power, and so fighting spread throughout Europe until the Treaty of Utrecht, in which King Louis IX's grandson received the Spanish crown, but France promised that they would never be ruled by the same monarch. Over in England, Henry VII created the Protestant Church of England so he could divorce his wife. The power of the monarch in England, however, was limited by Parliament, who ensured that the monarch didn't abuse their power. Queen Elizabeth and Parliament had a really good relationship because she started to encourage members to speak their minds, but that didn't last very long. When Elizabeth died, the Tudor reign ended, and the Stuart dynasty took over the monarchy. James I, the first Stuart, believed firmly in divine right of kings, and so because the Puritans were threatening his power, he tried to get rid of them by approving the first English version of the Bible, which is known as the King James Bible, which a lot of people still read today. James's younger son Charles became king and did not get along with Parliament, and so he dismissed them and ruled without them for almost 11 years. He only reconvened Parliament in order to ask for more money following a religious rebellion. Charles looked for any moment in which he could dismiss Parliament for good. He wanted to get rid of this governing body. But a radical Puritan group within Parliament had moved to abolish the appointment of bishops in the Anglican Church. He saw the opportunity to arrest him for treason, so he marched up into Parliament with his army to make the arrest, giving away his intentions to take over Parliament Members of the Parliament rose up against the king, and boom, this English Civil War began. The supporters of Parliament were known as the Roundheads due to their haircut that they had, and were led by Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell eventually rises to power as the commander-in-chief of the army until the king surrenders in 1646. When Cromwell took full control over England, he dismissed any members of Parliament that disagreed with him. He kind of became a little tyrannical, and those were left that came known as the Rump Parliament. England became a commonwealth, a republican government that was based on the common good of all the people. Cromwell also started to crack down on any form of entertainment and started wars with Spain over trade. Many people were troubled by the king's death, including Enlightenment philosopher Thomas Hobbes. He argued that the people need a supreme ruler, like a monarch, to know how to live, and this new republic wasn't going to go over very well. Following Cromwell's death, though, Parliament reinstated the monarchy, which became known as the Restoration. Parliament asked the son of beheaded Charles I to take over the crown, but they said there has to be conditions. They required the Act of Habeas Corpus to be passed that required that anyone who was accused of a crime had to be tried in court. After Charles II, his brother James was next to rule, but he was extremely unpopular because he was Catholic. So, Parliament gave the crown to Protestants, William and Mary. You might know them because there's a university named after them, and which became known as the Glorious Revolution, mainly because there was no bloodshed. It was a very easy transition. When they became king, they signed the English Bill of Rights into law, which gave certain rights to the English people and even further limited the rights of the monarchy. And England became known as a constitutional monarchy, which is a monarchy that is limited by the law. Meanwhile, over in the cold region of the world, Russia, they were far behind the rest of Europe in any technological advances in centralized government. They were mainly run by church officials and boyars, otherwise known as landowners, though were also known as nobles, and they were ruled by Ivan. Ivan claimed the title of Tsar, or ruler, and intended to rule without limits on his power. During his reign, he made a lot of reforms, such as a general council, military appointments based on merit, and legal codes. But he soon became known as Ivan the Terrible because he was super oppressive, killed his advisors, and had a secret police that punished anyone who was in opposition to him. He even killed his own son, which left him without an heir to the throne. Following Ivan, the Romanov family took over power in Russia, and Peter the Great was crowned as Tsar. Peter sought to modernize Russia through a process called modernization. He started to modernize the military, brought the church under state control, built up Russian industry, started a newspaper, and sponsored new schools. He also had founded a city called St. Petersburg, which is still around today, which became known for its westernized architecture and became the capital of Russia. Following Peter, the Tsarina, aka the female ruler, Catherine the Great, took over, and she also continued some of these reforms, improving trade and schools. Meanwhile, over in the Holy Roman Empire, they are headed by the Habsburg family. But he didn't have any absolute power. There was many of those smaller states. We talked about this previously when we started talking about the German princes. When the emperor ruled that 2 Protestant churches be shut down, peasants in the area revolted, and they started the 30 Years' War. They warred against each other, with European powers also joining in the fight, the Spanish on the side of the Catholics, and the French on the side of the Protestants. Eventually, they ended up with the Treaty of Westphalia, which ended the war by reducing the power of the Holy Roman Emperor and extends religious tolerance to all the Germans. When the Holy Roman Emperor died without a male heir, his daughter Maria Theresa took the throne. But the Hohenzollern's, led by Frederick the Great, wanted power, which resulted in the 7 Years' War, which you all must know as the French and Indian War, because it spread all the way to the American colonies between the British, Austria, France, and Russia. Now, on to the Enlightenment. All of the monarch's powers were threatened by these Enlightenment ideas. The scientific revolution had started to make European thinkers start to question authority through the power of reason and also the ability for humans to be able to solve their own problems. A lot of people started meeting in these social gatherings called salons, which brought together philosophers, artists, scientists, writers to discuss these ideas. The main key Enlightenment ideas were the ability to reason. Reason can be used to solve problems. Reason frees people from ignorance. The natural world is governed by laws that can be discovered through reason. And human behavior is governed by natural laws. And then governments should also reflect these natural laws and encourage education and debate. There's a couple different thinkers here. The English thinkers Thomas Hobbes wrote in his book Leviathan that people needed government in order to impose order. He said that people should give up some freedoms in exchange for peace, safety, and order, and he called this exchange the social contract. He essentially said people can't rule themselves, and they need a ruler. English philosopher John Locke believed that people were naturally happy, they were tolerant, and they were reasonable, and that every man has the right to life, liberty, and property, and that the purpose of the government was to protect those rights. Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed that people were born good, but that society is the one that corrupted people. The government should therefore work for the common good because people don't know how to rule themselves, and that all people are equal and should be recognized as equal. Baron de Montesquieu thought that the government needed separation of powers because they were going to abuse their power, so he advocated for the government to be broken up into different branches to check the power of the others so that no corruption would happen. Voltaire, otherwise known as Marie Antoinette, attacked injustice wherever he saw it. He talked about injustice among the nobility, the government, and also in the church. Denis Diderot was the first to compile all human knowledge into the encyclopedia. We still use the encyclopedia pretty regularly today. Mary Wollstonecraft rejected the common view that women's roles were as wives. She demanded equal rights for women and was the first real woman activist. Adam Smith also used reason to analyze economic systems, and in his book Wealth of Nations, he argued for laissez-faire economics, or the idea that the government should not interfere in economic prosperity and leave the economics up to the people. As a result of the Enlightenment on the monarchs, many of the Enlightenment ideas started to inspire them to make changes to their government, and these monarchs that made these changes became known as enlightened despots. Frederick II, King of Prussia, believed that his duty was to rule with absolute power, but he also thought that some of these Enlightenment ideas were pretty sweet, such as starting education, so he started elementary schools for Prussian children. He got rid of torture, and he also started to support religious tolerance. We talked about Catherine II because she became the ruler of Russia, the first Tsarina, and she started establishing order, but she was the first to draft a constitution and a code of laws, but they were never actually put into place. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.